stood inside truth. Hercule Poirot approached quietly, his footsteps soft, respectful. He did not interrupt her thoughts. He waited, because healing does not accept command, it accepts presence. She spoke first, her voice calm but fragile. "It feels different." Poirot nodded gently. "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "Empty." Poirot answered, "Empty is not absence." She looked at him, uncertain. He continued softly, "Empty is space." She understood slowly, because space allows rebuilding. Lady Ashford remained confined to her room, not by force, but by consequence. Mrs. Crane had already begun making arrangements to leave, her confidence quieter but intact. Captain Vale stood outside with quiet patience, ensuring order without imposing control. The manor itself had fallen silent. No more secrets moved within its walls. No more fear controlled its shadows. Only memory remained. Diana's voice trembled faintly. "Will it follow me?" Poirot answered gently. "Memory always follows." She closed her eyes briefly. "Then I will carry it." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, because carrying truth is the only way to live beyond it." She looked toward the open sky beyond the gates. For the first time, her expression held something new. Not peace, not yet, but possibility. Poirot watched her quietly.
Welcome to Mistha Stories, a quiet corner where mysteries unfold slowly. Every story here is original, crafted with care, inspired by classic detective fiction, made for calm listening and thoughtful nights. So settle in, stay curious, and let the mystery reveal itself.
The envelope rested alone on the silver tray like something alive, something watching. It did not belong among the ordinary clutter of bills and advertisements. It carried weight, not just in its thickness, but in its intention. The paper was heavy cream, smooth as bone, and embossed with a crest whose lines spoke of old money and older pride. It had waited patiently for discovery. Hercule Poirot noticed it the moment he entered his sitting room. Nothing escaped him. Not the faint shift in air where the tray had been moved. Not the way the morning light caught the wax seal and made it gleam like a drop of frozen blood. He paused in the doorway, his polished shoes silent against the floor, his dark eyes narrowing slightly with curiosity and perhaps pleasure. Captain Hastings sat at the small breakfast table, devouring toast with the enthusiasm of a man who had never once considered restraint. Crumbs scattered like fallen snow around his plate. "You have something interesting," Hastings said between bites, noticing Poirot's stillness. Poirot did not answer immediately. He approached the tray with slow precision, his fingers adjusting the alignment of the envelope by a fraction, correcting an imperfection no one else would have seen. "It is not merely interesting," Poirot murmured. "It is deliberate." He lifted it carefully, feeling the texture beneath his fingertips. The wax seal had been broken cleanly, not crushed or torn. Whoever had opened it before placing it here had done so with respect or fear. He slid a finger beneath the flap and withdrew the card inside. Hastings watched him. "Bad news?" Poirot smiled faintly. "On the contrary, mon ami, the best news." He read in silence. His expression did not change, but something deep within his eyes sharpened, the familiar spark, the quiet awakening of the hunt. "Well?" Hastings pressed. Poirot lowered the card.
"We have been invited," he said. Hastings groaned. "To the countryside?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes." Hastings leaned back dramatically. Soft beds, damp air, overcooked vegetables, and dreadful people pretending to be charming. Poirot allowed himself the smallest laugh. "Precisely." He handed Hastings the card. The handwriting was elegant but impatient, the ink pressed hard into the paper as if the writer had been restraining urgency. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, I find myself in need of your exceptional abilities. My home, Elmwood Manor, stands upon the edge of something I do not fully understand. I fear there are truths here that wish to remain buried, and yet they stir. Come at once. I believe lives depend upon it. Lady Eleanor Ashford." Hastings read it twice. "That sounds rather serious." Poirot moved to the window, clasping his hands behind his back. "Yes," he said softly. Outside, London moved with its usual indifference. Carriages passed, people hurried. Life continued, unaware that somewhere something had begun to unravel. "She sounds frightened," Hastings said. Poirot did not turn. "She sounds," he replied slowly, "like someone who has waited a very long time to speak." Hastings studied him. "You're pleased?" Poirot allowed himself a quiet breath. "Yes." He turned then, and his face held an expression Hastings knew well. It was not excitement, not exactly. It was something colder, something deeper. Purpose. "Order must be restored," Poirot said gently. Hastings laughed. "You haven't even left London yet." Poirot's gaze drifted back to the envelope. "No," he agreed, "but already I feel the disorder." He picked up the card again, tracing the edges. There was something beneath the words, something unsaid, a shadow behind the ink. He could feel it. Somewhere far away, in a place he had never seen, a house waited. And inside that house, someone was afraid. Poirot smiled softly, not with joy, but with certainty. The game had begun. The train left London beneath the grey sky that promised nothing and everything at once. Smoke curled past the windows like restless spirits, twisting and dissolving into the cold air. Hercule Poirot sat upright in his seat, immaculate as ever, his gloved hands folded neatly atop his cane. Across from him, Captain Hastings shifted constantly, adjusting his collar, then his cuffs, then his posture, as if discomfort were a companion he could not dismiss. "You've been silent for nearly an hour," Hastings said at last. Poirot did not look at him. His gaze remained fixed on the passing countryside, where skeletal trees reached toward the clouds like pleading hands. "I am thinking," he replied gently. Hastings leaned forward. "About Lady Ashford?" Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Yes." There had been something in her letter, not merely fear. Fear was simple. Fear had edges. This had been something heavier, something worn. Hastings followed his gaze outside. "Strange place for danger," he muttered. "Looks peaceful enough." Poirot smiled faintly. "Peace, mon ami, is often the most convincing disguise." The train slowed. The sound of metal against metal shrieked softly as they approached the station. Hastings gathered his coat. "You really believe someone's life is in danger?" Poirot stood. "I believe," he said quietly, "that someone believes it." They stepped onto the platform. The air was colder here, sharper. It carried the scent of damp earth and old wood. A motor car waited at the far end, black and silent, its surface gleaming faintly beneath the dull sky. A driver stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes. My lady has been expecting you." There was something in the man's voice. Respect, certainly, but beneath it, something else. Relief. They drove in silence. The road twisted through fields and forests that grew denser with every mile. The trees leaned inward, their branches knitting together overhead, choking the light. Hastings shifted again, his earlier bravado fading. "Feels rather cut off," he said. Poirot watched the shadows slide across the glass. "Yes." The manor appeared suddenly, rising from the earth like something unearthed rather than built. Elmwood Manor stood vast and still, its stone walls darkened by time and weather. Its windows stared outward without warmth, without welcome. Hastings exhaled softly. "Well." Poirot said nothing. The car stopped before the entrance. The great doors loomed above them, carved with symbols too worn to understand. The driver opened Poirot's door. "She is inside." Poirot stepped out. The air here felt heavier, as if it remembered things. The doors opened before he could knock. Lady Eleanor Ashford stood waiting. She was tall, her posture flawless, her expression composed. Her hair, streaked with silver, was pulled tightly back, revealing a face carved by strength and endurance rather than age. Her eyes fixed on Poirot immediately. Not hopeful, certain. "You came." Her voice did not tremble, but something deep within it had already begun to break. Poirot bowed slightly. "Of course, madame." She studied him carefully, as if measuring something. Behind her, the manor stretched into darkness. "You must forgive the urgency of my letter." "There is nothing to forgive." She hesitated, for just a moment. Then she stepped aside. "Please," she said. Poirot entered. The air inside was cool and still. The silence was complete. No footsteps echoed, no voices drifted from distant rooms. The manor felt abandoned. And yet it was not. Poirot could feel it. Watching, waiting. Lady Ashford turned toward him. "There are others here." Poirot met her gaze. "Yes," he said softly. "There are always are." Lady Ashford led them through a corridor that seemed to stretch longer than the house should have allowed. Their footsteps echoed softly, swallowed by thick carpets whose colors had long ago surrendered to time. Portraits lined the walls, their painted figures staring outward with expressions that ranged from pride to quiet accusation. Hastings slowed beside one, studying the stern face of a man whose eyes seemed almost alive. "Family?" Hastings asked. Lady Ashford did not turn. "Yes." There was no warmth in the word. Poirot observed everything, the faint smell of lavender, too deliberate to be natural, the way the curtains were drawn just enough to admit light, but never enough to allow comfort. The air held a strange stillness, like a breath held too long. They entered a drawing-room where a fire burned, though it gave little warmth. The flames moved restlessly, snapping and whispering as if disturbed by something unseen. Several people stood scattered throughout the room, each turning as the newcomers entered. Poirot saw them in a single glance. A large man near the fire, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored coat. His face was red, not from heat, but from something deeper. His eyes narrowed immediately upon seeing Poirot. A young woman near the window, pale and still, her hands clasped tightly together. She looked at Poirot as if she wanted to speak, but feared what speaking might bring. Another woman seated on a velvet chair, her posture relaxed, her expression amused. Her eyes glittered with something sharp and unreadable. and a man standing apart from the others, silent, watchful. His face carried the quiet scars of experience, and his gaze lingered on Poirot with open suspicion. "These are my guests," Lady Ashford said. Her voice was steady, but Poirot sensed the strain beneath it. The large man stepped forward first. "So, you're the famous detective." Poirot smiled politely. "I am merely a man who observes." The man laughed harshly. "Then observe this. Nothing is wrong here." His laughter died, too quickly. Poirot met his eyes calmly. "And yet," Poirot said softly, "you are afraid." The man's jaw tightened. He said nothing. The young woman moved suddenly. "You shouldn't have come," she said to Poirot. Her voice trembled, and she seemed almost shocked by her own words. Lady Ashford turned sharply. "Diana!" But the girl shook her head. "No, he deserves to know." She looked at Poirot again, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Something is happening here." The room fell silent. The seated woman laughed quietly. "My dear, you make it sound so dramatic." She arose gracefully, approaching Poirot with slow confidence. "Do forgive her. She frightens easily." Poirot inclined his head. "Fear," he said gently, "is rarely without reason." The silent man spoke then, his voice calm but cold. "And what reason do you believe exists here?" Poirot turned toward him. "That," he said, "is why I am here." The fire cracked loudly. No one spoke. Poirot could feel it now, stronger than before. The tension, the secrets, the lies, they filled the room like invisible smoke. Lady Ashford stepped closer to Poirot. Her voice dropped. "I asked you here," she said quietly, "because I believe someone in this house intends to kill." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They fell heavy and final. The young woman covered her mouth, her breath breaking into quiet, helpless sound. The large man swore under his breath. The seated woman's smile faded, and the silent man did not move at all. Poirot looked at each of them, one by one, carefully, patiently. He could see it now, not clearly, not yet, but it was there, hidden behind eyes, buried behind silence, waiting. Poirot folded his hands gently. "No one leaves Elmwood Manor until the truth is found." Outside, the wind rose against the ancient walls, and somewhere deep within the manor, something unseen began to move. Night fell over Elmwood Manor with quiet authority, swallowing the last traces of daylight and leaving the house suspended in uneasy darkness. The wind pressed softly against the tall windows, whispering through unseen cracks like a voice that had forgotten language but not intent. Inside, the guests remained gathered in the drawing-room, though no one had suggested it. No one had needed to. Fear had done what politeness could not. Hercule Poirot stood near the fire, though he did not feel its warmth. His eyes moved slowly from face to face, collecting small truths. The young woman, Diana, sat rigidly at the edge of her chair, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dress as if she feared she might disappear if she let go. The large man, Sir Reginald Blackwell, paced restlessly, his heavy footsteps marking his agitation. Mrs. Lydia Crane, elegant and composed, observed everything with quiet fascination, her calmness almost unnatural. Captain Marcus Vale remained near the shadows, his posture relaxed, but his attention absolute. Lady Ashford stood apart from them all. Her strength was visible, but so was her exhaustion. "You believe one of us is a murderer," Sir Reginald said at last, his voice thick with restrained anger. Lady Ashford met his gaze. "I believe," she replied evenly, "that someone intends murder." Sir Reginald let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "This is madness." Poirot spoke quietly. "No, monsieur. Madness is without reason. This has reason." Sir Reginald turned on him. "You've been here less than an hour." Poirot smiled gently. "Time," he said, "is rarely the most important factor." Mrs. Crane laughed softly. "Oh, I do like him." Her eyes glittered with interest. Captain Vale's voice cut through the air. "And what do you propose to do, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly across the room, his footsteps precise, deliberate. He paused beside the long table near the wall, where a silver tray held several glasses of untouched wine. He studied them, carefully. The arrangement was perfect, too perfect. He turned. "I propose," he said softly, "to observe." Sir Reginald scoffed. "You'll observe nothing." Poirot met his gaze calmly. "I already have." Silence followed. The tension deepened. Lady Ashford spoke again. "There is something else." Her voice carried weight. They all turned toward her. "I have received letters." Sir Reginald frowned. "What letters?" She hesitated. Then she moved toward the small desk near the window. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened a drawer and removed a folded sheet of paper. She handed it to Poirot. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was precise, cold. "You cannot escape what was done. The debt must be paid." Poirot read it twice. "When did this arrive?" he asked gently. "This morning." "Before we arrived?" "Yes." Sir Reginald waved dismissively. "A prank." But his voice lacked conviction. Diana spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was another one." Lady Ashford closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." Captain Vale's expression hardened. "And you did not inform us?" Lady Ashford's voice broke for the first time. "I did not want to believe it." The admission hung in the air. Poirot folded the letter carefully. "The author," he said quietly, "wishes to be known." Mrs. Crane raised an eyebrow. "That seems unlikely." Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. "No," he paused, "it is inevitable." Outside, the wind struck the glass sharply. Inside, no one spoke. Fear had found its place among them, and it was comfortable.
Dinner was announced shortly after, though the word itself felt absurd under the circumstances. Hunger had abandoned them all. Still, ritual demanded obedience. Routine was the fragile thread holding the illusion of normalcy together. The dining room was vast, its ceiling disappearing into shadows above. A long table stretched through its center, polished to a mirror-like sheen. 8 chairs waited in perfect alignment, 8 places prepared with mathematical precision. Poirot paused at the threshold. There was something here, not visible, but present. The others entered behind him. Their movements were slower now, cautious, as if each step might disturb something waiting beneath the surface. Lady Ashford took her seat at the head of the table. Diana sat to her right, her face pale beneath the soft glow of candlelight. Sir Reginald lowered himself heavily into his chair, his jaw tight. Mrs. Crane sat with effortless grace, as though attending an ordinary social gathering. Captain Vale chose his place carefully, positioning himself where he could see everyone. Poirot remained standing a moment longer.
observing. The table was flawless. The glasses were identical. The silverware aligned with unnatural exactness. Perfection. And yet, he moved suddenly. His hand reached forward, adjusting one glass by less than an inch. No one else would have noticed the difference, but it mattered. Everything mattered. Sir Reginald watched him. "You expect to find murder in a wine glass?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I expect," he said softly, "to find truth." Servants entered silently, carrying plates with mechanical precision. Their eyes remained lowered, their faces revealed nothing. Fear lived here too. Poirot noticed the youngest footman trembling as he poured wine. The liquid shimmered red beneath the candlelight, beautiful and dangerous. Diana hesitated before touching her glass. Poirot saw it, the hesitation. He leaned slightly toward her. "You are wise," he said quietly. Her eyes met his. She did not drink. Sir Reginald lifted his glass boldly. "Enough of this nonsense." He drank deeply. The sound of swallowing echoed in the silence. Mrs. Crane sipped hers with casual elegance. Captain Vale did not drink. Lady Ashford stared at her untouched glass as though it might speak. Poirot did not drink. He watched. Seconds passed. Nothing happened. Sir Reginald laughed loudly. "You see?" His laughter rang hollow, too loud, too forced. Poirot's gaze drifted slowly across the table. Everyone was watching everyone else. Trust had already died here. No one had buried it yet. Dinner passed with little conversation. Words felt dangerous. Silence felt safer. But silence was never truly safe. Halfway through the meal, Diana suddenly gasped. The sound shattered the fragile calm. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her voice failed. Lady Ashford turned sharply. "What is it?" Diana's breathing quickened. "I feel strange." Sir Reginald slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous." Poirot was already moving. He reached her side, his voice calm and steady. "Breathe slowly." Her hands trembled. "I didn't drink." Poirot's eyes flicked instantly toward the glasses. He smelled it before he saw it. Almonds. Faint, but unmistakable. His gaze snapped toward Sir Reginald. Sir Reginald frowned. "What?" Poirot moved closer. The scent was stronger now. Sir Reginald's face was flushed, his breathing uneven. Confusion replaced arrogance. "What's happening?" Poirot's voice was very quiet. "You have been poisoned." The word fell into the room like a stone into deep water. Mrs. Crane stood up abruptly. Captain Vale's hand moved instinctively toward his pocket. Lady Ashford froze completely. Sir Reginald stared at Poirot. Disbelief, fear, rage. "You're lying." But his voice betrayed him. His strength was already fading. His hand trembled violently. His glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the floor, and Sir Reginald Blackwell collapsed. The sound of Sir Reginald's body striking the floor echoed louder than it should have. It was not the impact itself, but what it represented. Finality, truth, consequence. His massive frame lay twisted beside the shattered remains of his glass, his breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. His face, once flushed with arrogance, had turned an unnatural shade of pale gray. Diana screamed. The sound tore through the dining room, raw and helpless. She stumbled backward, her chair falling behind her with a violent crash. Lady Ashford remained frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Mrs. Crane covered her mouth, though whether in shock or fascination was impossible to tell. Captain Vale moved forward instantly, kneeling beside the fallen man. "Reginald!" he barked. There was no response. Poirot stepped forward calmly, his composure untouched by the chaos. He crouched beside Sir Reginald, his fingers gently pressing against the man's neck. The pulse was there. Weak, but alive. "For now," Poirot murmured softly. Sir Reginald's eyes fluttered open briefly. Confusion swam within them, followed quickly by fear. Real fear, the kind that stripped away pride and left only the fragile truth beneath. "Help me," he whispered. Poirot met his gaze. "I will try." Sir Reginald's breathing hitched. His lips parted again, struggling to form words. The sound broke apart. His body convulsed suddenly, violently, before collapsing into stillness once more. Not death, not yet, but close enough that everyone in the room could feel its shadow. Captain Vale stood slowly. "We need a doctor." Lady Ashford nodded mechanically. Yes, of course." But no one moved. Fear held them in place. Poirot stood. His eyes moved to the shattered glass on the floor. The wine had spread across the polished surface, dark and reflective, beautiful, deadly. He turned to the others. "No one leaves this room." Mrs. Crane laughed weakly. "You cannot be serious." Poirot's gaze hardened. "I am entirely serious." Captain Vale's jaw tightened. "You think one of us did this?" Poirot did not answer immediately. He did not need to. The silence spoke for him. Diana's voice trembled. "But why?" Poirot looked at her gently. "That," he said softly, "is always the question." Lady Ashford found her voice again. "Whoever did this is still here." Her words carried terrible certainty. Captain Vale's eyes narrowed. "Or has already escaped." Poirot shook his head slowly. "No." He gestured toward the windows. "They remain locked." He gestured toward the doors. "And no one has left." Mrs. Crane exhaled shakily. "Then we are trapped." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Yes." The words settled over them like falling snow. Diana began to cry quietly, her shoulders shaking as the reality closed in around her. Poirot watched each of them carefully. Every movement, every breath, every glance. The truth was here, hidden, waiting. Sir Reginald groaned weakly. Still alive, still fighting. Poirot stepped toward the table once more. His fingers hovered over the remaining glasses. One had been death. The others had been spared. Deliberately. This had not been random. It had been precise. Personal. Poirot turned slowly. "The poison," he said quietly, "was meant only for Sir Reginald." Captain Vale stared at him. "You're certain?" Poirot met his gaze. "Yes." Mrs. Crane whispered softly. "Then someone wanted him dead." Poirot's expression remained calm. "Yes." He paused. "And someone failed." Outside, the wind howled against the ancient walls of Elmwood Manor. Inside, suspicion took its first true breath. No one spoke. No one moved, because each of them understood now. The danger was no longer coming. It was already here, and it was watching them. The sound of Sir Reginald's body striking the floor echoed louder than it should have. It was not the impact itself, but what it represented. Finality, truth, consequence. His massive frame lay twisted beside the shattered remains of his glass, his breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. His face, once flushed with arrogance, had turned an unnatural shade of pale gray. Diana screamed. The sound tore through the dining room, raw and helpless. She stumbled backward, her chair falling behind her with a violent crash. Lady Ashford remained frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Mrs. Crane covered her mouth, though whether in shock or fascination was impossible to tell. Captain Vale moved forward instantly, kneeling beside the fallen man. "Reginald!" he barked. There was no response. Poirot stepped forward calmly, his composure untouched by the chaos. He crouched beside Sir Reginald, his fingers gently pressing against the man's neck. The pulse was there. Weak, but alive. "For now," Poirot murmured softly. Sir Reginald's eyes fluttered open briefly. Confusion swam within them, followed quickly by fear. Real fear, the kind that stripped away pride and left only the fragile truth beneath. "Help me," he whispered. Poirot met his gaze. "I will try." Sir Reginald's breathing hitched. His lips parted again, struggling to form words. The sound broke apart. His body convulsed suddenly, violently, before collapsing into stillness once more. Not death, not yet, but close enough that everyone in the room could feel its shadow. Captain Vale stood slowly. "We need a doctor." Lady Ashford nodded mechanically. Yes, of course." But no one moved. Fear held them in place. Poirot stood. His eyes moved to the shattered glass on the floor. The wine had spread across the polished surface, dark and reflective. Beautiful, deadly. He turned to the others. "The poison was meant only for Sir Reginald," he said quietly. Captain Vale stared at him. "You're certain?" Poirot met his gaze. "Yes." Mrs. Crane whispered softly. "Then someone wanted him dead." Poirot's expression remained calm. "Yes." He paused. "And someone failed." Outside, the wind howled against the ancient walls of Elmwood Manor. Inside, suspicion took its first true breath. No one spoke, no one moved, because each of them understood now. The danger was no longer coming. It was already here, and it was watching them. Sir Reginald Blackwell did not die that night. He hovered somewhere between presence and absence, his breath thin and fragile, like a thread stretched too far. He had been carried to the library, his immense body suddenly reduced to something disturbingly human, vulnerable, weak, mortal. The doctor arrived just before midnight, his boots wet from the cold earth outside. He worked quickly, his face grim, his hands steady from years of witnessing the fragile line between life and its sudden end. He was fortunate, the doctor said quietly at last. Poirot stood nearby, watching. "Fortunate," Captain Vale repeated sharply. The doctor nodded. "The dose was not strong enough to kill him immediately." Mrs. Crane laughed bitterly. "How comforting!" But Poirot understood something the others did not. This had not been a mistake. It had been intentional. Sir Reginald stirred faintly, his lips moving weakly. His voice, when it came, was barely more than air. "He knows." Poirot leaned closer. "Who knows?" Sir Reginald's eyes opened slightly, filled with pain and terror. "The vault." The word lingered in the air. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "The vault." Sir Reginald tried to speak again, but his strength failed him. His head rolled weakly to the side, his consciousness slipping once more into darkness. Captain Vale frowned. What vault? Lady Ashford had gone very still. Poirot noticed it instantly. Her breathing had changed. Her eyes had darkened. "You know," Poirot said gently. She did not answer, not immediately. The fire crackled beside them, filling the silence with uneasy sound. At last, she spoke. "There is a safe." Her voice was calm, but the effort behind it was immense. "In the cellar." Mrs. Crane raised an eyebrow. "And what secrets does it keep?" Lady Ashford did not look at her. "The past." No one spoke. Poirot inclined his head. "I would like to see it." Lady Ashford hesitated. Fear passed briefly across her face, not fear of discovery, fear of confirmation. She nodded slowly. "I will show you." They descended together. The cellar was colder than the rest of the house, its stone walls slick with age and silence. Their footsteps echoed hollowly, as though the house itself listened. Lady Ashford carried the lantern. Its light trembled slightly in her hand. At the far end of the cellar stood a steel door, plain, unforgiving. She stopped before it. For a moment she did not move. Poirot watched her carefully. "This vault," he said softly, "has been closed for some time." She nodded. "Yes." Her hand shook as she reached into her pocket and removed a small key. She inserted it slowly. The lock resisted, then surrendered. The door opened with a dull, tired sound. Inside, shelves lined the walls. Documents, boxes, memories, secrets. Poirot stepped forward. The air inside smelled untouched, undisturbed, except he saw it immediately. One of the boxes had been moved very recently. He turned. "You opened this." Lady Ashford shook her head. "No." Poirot's gaze remained steady. "Then someone else did." The truth settled heavily upon them. Someone had come here, someone who knew, someone who had been close enough, brave enough, desperate enough. Behind them, the lantern flickered violently. Lady Ashford's breath caught. Poirot turned toward the darkness beyond the cellar door. He could feel it again, the presence, watching, waiting, smiling. The air inside the vault was unnaturally still, as though it had been sealed not merely against intrusion, but against time itself. Dust lay thick upon most surfaces, undisturbed for years. Yet Poirot's eyes had already found the one imperfection. A single file rested slightly askew. It was a small thing. To anyone else, meaningless. To Poirot, it was everything. He stepped closer, his shoes making no sound against the cold stone floor. Behind him, Lady Ashford remained near the door, her lantern trembling faintly in her grasp. "You are certain," Poirot said quietly, "that you have not entered here recently?" Her voice came after a pause. "I am certain." Poirot studied the file without touching it. "Then someone has." The lantern flickered again, as if in agreement. Lady Ashford swallowed. "No one else has the key." Poirot did not look at her. "Keys," he said gently, "can be borrowed." He reached forward at last and lifted the file. The paper inside was yellowed with age, but the ink remained clear. Names, dates, transactions, agreements written in careful, precise handwriting. Poirot's eyes moved quickly across the page, then stopped. He read the line again, and again. Behind him, Lady Ashford spoke. "What is it?" Poirot did not answer immediately. His expression had changed. Not surprise, recognition. He turned slowly. "This is a record of debts." Lady Ashford stiffened. Debts? Poirot inclined his head. Yes. He held up the paper. Money owed, promises made, obligations created. Her face had grown pale. Poirot continued, and broken. Silence filled the vault, heavy, unavoidable. Lady Ashford stepped closer. "Let me see." Poirot handed her the document. Her hands trembled as she read. "No," she whispered. Poirot watched her carefully. "You recognize it?" She closed her eyes. "Yes." Her voice broke. "It was never meant to be seen." Poirot said nothing, because he understood. This was not merely a financial record. This was motive. This was history. This was reason. Lady Ashford looked at him. They ruined each other. Her voice carried years of buried pain. They destroyed everything. Poirot spoke gently. "And now someone seeks repayment." She laughed weakly. "After all this time?" Poirot's eyes were calm. "Time," he said softly, "does not forgive. It only waits." Behind them, a sound broke the silence. Footsteps. Above. Faint, but unmistakable. Lady Ashford froze. Poirot turned toward the vault entrance. Someone was moving. Carefully. Quietly. Listening. Poirot stepped forward without hesitation. He emerged into the cellar. Darkness greeted him, but he knew he was no longer alone. He could feel it. The presence had drawn closer, testing him, measuring him. He spoke into the darkness. "You have come very far." No answer, only silence. But silence could speak, and this silence was alive. Poirot returned slowly to Lady Ashford. "They know," he said quietly. Her voice trembled. "What do they know?" Poirot's eyes held hers. "That we are close." The lantern flickered again, and somewhere in Elmwood Manor a door closed. The sound of the closing door echoed faintly through the cellar, but it carried the weight of certainty. It was not an accident. It was not the house settling or the wind forcing its way through old wood. It was deliberate. Someone had been there. Someone had been listening. Lady Ashford's breathing had grown shallow. The lantern in her hand cast long, trembling shadows across the stone walls, turning familiar shapes into something distorted and threatening. "We are not safe here," she whispered. Poirot remained calm. "Safety," he said gently, "is often an illusion." He stepped past her, moving toward the narrow staircase that led back to the main floor. Each step upward felt heavier, not from effort, but from realization. Whoever had poisoned Sir Reginald had not acted blindly. They knew where to strike. They knew what to protect. And now they knew Poirot had begun to understand. That changed everything. They emerged into the corridor. The house was silent, but it was no longer peaceful. It felt alert now, awake, watching them in return. Captain Vale appeared suddenly at the far end of the hall, his expression tense. "I heard movement," he said. Poirot studied him carefully. "And what did you see?" Vale hesitated. "Nothing," but the word carried uncertainty. Mrs. Crane stepped from the drawing-room, her face pale beneath her composed exterior. "I thought I heard voices." Poirot's eyes moved between them. "And yet no one admits to speaking." The truth lingered uncomfortably between them. Diana appeared next, her eyes red from quiet tears. Is he dead? She meant Sir Reginald. Poirot shook his head. No. Relief passed across her face, followed quickly by something else. Fear. Lady Ashford spoke. Someone entered the vault. Captain Vale frowned. That's impossible. Poirot met his gaze. And yet it happened. Mrs. Crane folded her arms tightly. Then whoever did this is still here. Poirot inclined his head. Yes. Diana's voice trembled. They're watching us. Poirot did not dismiss her fear, because she was right. The house held more than its occupants. It held intent. Captain Vale spoke carefully. What was in the vault? Poirot answered simply, truth. No one asked him to explain. They did not want to hear it. Not yet. A floorboard creaked somewhere above them. All eyes lifted instinctively. The sound had been soft, careful, human. Poirot turned slowly. The staircase disappeared into darkness. Someone had been there. Someone had waited just beyond sight, and they had retreated, for now. Poirot spoke calmly. The poison was not the end. Mrs. Crane's voice was barely audible. It was the beginning. Poirot met her gaze. Yes. Lady Ashford closed her eyes briefly, her strength wavering for the first time since his arrival. They will try again. Poirot did not contradict her, because he knew she was right. The first attempt had failed, but failure did not end intent. It refined it, improved it, made it more dangerous. Poirot looked at each of them, carefully. One of them carried the truth, one of them carried death, and they were waiting for weakness, waiting for opportunity, waiting for the moment when fear would make a mistake. Poirot folded his hands gently. No one is to be alone, he said quietly. Captain Vale nodded. Mrs. Crane did not argue. Diana moved closer to Lady Ashford, seeking comfort neither of them fully possessed. Outside, the wind pressed harder against the ancient walls. Elmwood Manor stood unmoving, silent, patient, and somewhere inside it. Sleep did not visit Elmwood Manor that night. It lingered at the edges, hesitant, unwelcome. The house itself seemed to resist rest, its ancient bones whispering with memory and quiet unrest. Every creak of wood, every sigh of wind against the stone walls carried meaning now. Nothing was innocent any more. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the library, the fire burning low before him. The flames had lost their earlier strength. They flickered weakly, their light unsteady, like confidence fading. He preferred it this way. Darkness revealed truths that daylight concealed. The chair beneath him was comfortable, but he did not relax into it. His posture remained perfect, his hands folded, his eyes half closed, not in sleep, but in thought. He saw it all again, the glasses, the hesitation, the smell of almonds, the vault, the footsteps, the fear. It was there. The truth existed already. It only required patience. Behind him the door opened slowly. Poirot did not turn. He had expected it. You do not sleep, Monsieur Poirot. Lady Ashford's voice carried exhaustion now. The strength she had worn like armor throughout the evening had begun to fracture. Poirot opened his eyes. Sleep, he said softly, comes easily only to the innocent. She stepped further into the room. Her face looked older in the dim light, not from years, but from weight, burden, regret. "You believe one of them did this?" It was not a question. Poirot inclined his head. "Yes." She moved closer to the fire, extending her hands towards its weak warmth. "They have all suffered," she said quietly. Poirot watched her carefully. "Suffering does not prevent guilt," he replied gently. "It often creates it." She closed her eyes briefly. "I brought them here." Her voice broke. "I gathered them under this roof." Poirot said nothing, because he understood. She had not gathered guests, she had gathered ghosts. Her ghosts. "I thought," she whispered, "if they faced each other again, perhaps the past would finally die." Poirot's voice was calm. "The past does not die, madame." She looked at him. "It waits." Tears filled her eyes, though she did not let them fall. "You know," she said. Poirot did not answer directly. He rarely did. "I know," he said instead, "that fear has lived here longer than any of you." The fire cracked softly. Lady Ashford's shoulders trembled once, then stilled. "Sir Reginald," she said quietly, "will he live?" Poirot considered the question carefully. "Yes." Relief passed across her face. Then guilt followed it. Poirot saw both. "You do not rejoice," he observed gently. She turned away. "You see too much." Poirot allowed himself the faintest smile. "It is my profession." Silence returned, but it was not empty. It was full, full of memory, full of truth, full of consequence. Lady Ashford spoke again. "They will kill him." Poirot's eyes remained calm. "Yes." She looked at him sharply. "You say that so easily." Poirot's voice softened. "Because they must." She stared at him. "Must?" He met her gaze. "Sir Reginald knows something." The words fell quietly, but their meaning was immense. Lady Ashford's breath caught. "He spoke of the vault." Poirot nodded. "Yes." She whispered, barely audible. "He was never meant to remember." Poirot leaned forward slightly, and yet he did. Fear returned to her eyes, real fear, the kind that had nothing to do with death, and everything to do with truth. Upstairs, somewhere in the vast silence of Elmwood Manor, a floorboard creaked. Poirot did not look up. He only listened, because he knew the next move had already begun. The sound above them had been soft, but it had not been accidental. Lady Ashford heard it too. Her eyes lifted slowly toward the ceiling, her face drained of what little color remained. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They listened, their senses sharpened by instinct. Another creak. Closer now. Poirot rose from his chair without haste. His movements were smooth, deliberate. Fear never rushed him. Fear was careless. Fear made mistakes. "This house," he said quietly, "is speaking." Lady Ashford wrapped her arms around herself as though she could hold together something inside that had begun to fracture. "It has been silent for years." Poirot moved toward the door. "Silence," he replied softly, "is often forced." He opened the door and stepped into the corridor. The air outside was colder. The lamps along the wall burned low, their weak light casting shadows that seemed to shift when unobserved. Lady Ashford followed closely behind him. At the far end of the corridor stood Diana. She was pale, her eyes wide, her breathing uneven. "She heard someone," she whispered. Poirot approached her gently. "Where?" She pointed toward the staircase. "Up there." Poirot studied her face carefully. She was afraid, but more importantly, she was telling the truth. Captain Vale emerged from another hallway, his expression alert. "You heard it too?" Poirot nodded. "Yes." Mrs. Crane appeared behind him, her composure thinner now. "This is becoming intolerable." But her voice betrayed her. She was afraid too. Poirot stepped toward the staircase. Each step upward was slow, precise. He listened. The house listened back. At the top of the stairs, the darkness deepened. The lamps here had burned nearly to nothing. The corridor stretched long and silent, lined with closed doors. Poirot stopped. Something was wrong. Not visibly, but undeniably. He moved forward. Lady Ashford remained below, watching. Diana stood frozen beside her. Captain Vale followed Poirot closely. Mrs. Crane hesitated, then followed too. Poirot reached the door to Sir Reginald's room. It was open. Only slightly, but enough. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He had closed it himself earlier. He pushed it open fully. The bed was disturbed, the blankets thrown aside. Sir Reginald Blackwell was gone. Lady Ashford gasped. "No!" Her voice broke completely now. Captain Vale stepped forward quickly. "He couldn't walk." Poirot said nothing. He moved slowly into the room. The window was closed, the curtains unmoved. No sign of struggle, no sign of forced entry, only absence. Poirot's eyes lowered to the floor. He saw it immediately. A single footprint, barely visible, but fresh. He crouched slightly, studying it. Not Sir Reginald's. Someone else had been here. Someone strong enough to move him. Someone careful enough to leave almost nothing behind. Captain Vale spoke, his voice tight. He didn't leave on his own. Poirot stood. No. Mrs. Crane's voice trembled. Then someone took him. Poirot met her gaze. Yes. Diana covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "They're going to kill him." Poirot's expression remained calm. "They intended to kill him before." He paused. "They failed." Lady Ashford whispered helplessly. "And now?" Poirot looked toward the dark corridor beyond the open door. "Now," he said quietly, "they will try again." The house had changed. The silence was no longer waiting. It was moving. The game was no longer hidden. It had begun in full. And someone inside Elmwood Manor had just made their boldest move yet. For several seconds, no one moved. The absence of Sir Reginald filled the room more completely than his presence ever had. The bed where he had lain was still warm. The blanket hung partially off the side, its edge swaying slightly, as though disturbed only moments ago. Whoever had taken him had done so quietly, efficiently, without hesitation. Diana began to weep openly now, her body trembling with helpless fear. "They took him," she whispered, over and over, as if repeating it might somehow undo it. Lady Ashford stood rigid beside her, but Poirot could see the storm beneath her composure. Her hands trembled, her breathing shallow. This was not merely fear. This was recognition. She had expected something like this. Captain Vale moved toward the window, checking the latch carefully. "It's still locked," he said. Poirot nodded faintly. "Yes." Mrs. Crane spoke from behind them, her voice unusually quiet. Then whoever did this never left. The truth settled over them with suffocating weight. They were not alone. Poirot walked slowly around the bed, his eyes scanning every detail. Nothing escaped him. Not the disturbed pillow, not the faint indentation where Sir Reginald's hand had rested, not the subtle drag mark near the foot of the bed. He followed it. It led toward the door, then disappeared. The person who had taken him knew this house well, very well. Captain Vale turned sharply. "We should search the grounds." Poirot spoke calmly. "No." Vale frowned. "Why not?" Poirot met his gaze. "Because Sir Reginald is still inside." The certainty in his voice silenced them all. Lady Ashford whispered, barely audible, "How can you know?" Poirot answered gently, "Because the person who took him does not wish to escape." He paused. "They wish to finish." Diana let out a broken sound, collapsing into Lady Ashford's arms. Mrs. Crane spoke carefully. "You mean to kill him?" Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Yes." Captain Vale's voice hardened. "Then we must stop them." Poirot's eyes remained calm. "Yes." But he did not move. Not yet. Because haste would only serve the killer. Poirot stepped back into the corridor, his mind already assembling the truth piece by piece, every movement, every glance, every silence. They had all been present. They had all had opportunity. They had all had reason. The house itself had become their prison and their stage. Poirot turned toward them. "No one separates." Captain Vale nodded firmly. Mrs. Crane agreed without protest. Lady Ashford held Diana tightly, as though afraid she might vanish too. Poirot began walking, not quickly, never quickly. He listened. The house spoke through its silences, through its shadows, through its secrets. And somewhere within those secrets, Sir Reginald Blackwell waited, alive or dying. Poirot stopped suddenly. He heard it, a sound, faint, below them, from the cellar. Poirot turned slowly toward the staircase that descended into darkness. The others followed his gaze. Fear returned instantly. Lady Ashford whispered, "No." But Poirot had already begun walking, because he knew the truth was waiting below, and so was death. The cellar steps descended into darkness that felt thicker than ordinary night. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the scent of damp stone and forgotten years. Hercule Poirot moved first, his hand gliding lightly along the wall for balance, though his posture remained perfectly composed. Behind him the others followed reluctantly, their courage pulled forward by fear rather than strength. No one spoke. No one dared, because they all knew what waited below, or feared they did. The lantern Lady Ashford carried cast weak, trembling light that barely reached the bottom. The shadows shifted with every movement, stretching and shrinking as if alive. The silence was no longer empty, it was listening. Poirot reached the final step. He paused, he listened. There it was, a sound, breathing, faint, uneven, human. Diana heard it too. Her fingers tightened painfully around Lady Ashford's arm. "He's here," she whispered. Poirot stepped forward into the cellar. The vault door stood open, completely open. It had not been open before. Lady Ashford gasped behind him, the sound sharp and fragile. "No!" Poirot entered the vault slowly, and he saw him. Sir Reginald Blackwell lay on the cold stone floor, his massive body twisted awkwardly, his chest rising and falling with shallow effort. His face glistened with sweat, his lips pale, his eyes half open but unfocused. Alive, barely. Diana cried out softly, relief and horror mixing into one broken sound. Poirot stepped forward beside him. Sir Reginald's eyes moved weakly toward him. Recognition flickered. Fear followed. "He," Sir Reginald whispered. Poirot leaned closer. "Yes." Sir Reginald's lips trembled. "He knows." The words came apart. Poirot spoke calmly. "Who knows?" Sir Reginald struggled to breathe. "The truth." His eyes rolled weakly toward Lady Ashford, then toward Captain Vale, then toward Mrs. Crane, then finally toward Diana. Poirot saw it, the look, not accusation, not hatred, something else, something deeper, something heavier. Sir Reginald's hand lifted weakly, trembling in the air. He tried to point, but his strength failed him. His arm collapsed. His breathing grew worse. Captain Vale stepped forward quickly. "We must move him." Poirot raised a hand. "No." Vale froze. Poirot's voice remained calm. "He was brought here for a reason." Lady Ashford whispered helplessly. "What reason?" Poirot's eyes moved slowly across the vault, then stopped. He saw it. The safe. It stood open. Inside. Empty. Lady Ashford saw it too. Her breath shattered. "No!" She stumbled forward, staring inside. "No, no!" Mrs. Crane spoke softly. "What was in it?" Lady Ashford did not answer, because she could not. Poirot answered for her. "Proof." The word hung in the cold air. Captain Vale's voice hardened. "Proof of what?" Poirot turned slowly. "Of everything." Sir Reginald groaned weakly behind them, still alive, still aware, still afraid. Poirot understood now. The poison had not been the end. It had been preparation. Preparation for this moment. Preparation for silence. Permanent silence. Poirot stood. The truth was no longer hidden. It was moving, breathing, choosing, and one of them had just stolen it. The open safe stood before them like an accusation. Its steel mouth, once sealed in secrecy, now revealed only absence. Lady Ashford stared into it as though staring into a grave. Her breathing became shallow, uneven, her hand gripping the edge of the vault door for support. "It was here," she whispered, her voice cracking beneath the weight of disbelief. Poirot watched her carefully, his expression calm, but his eyes alive with calculation. He did not rush. He never rushed, because panic belonged to the guilty, not to the truth. Behind him, Sir Reginald struggled weakly on the floor, his breath rattling in his chest like something loose and fragile. Captain Vale stepped closer, his face pale beneath his composure. "What was taken?" he asked quietly. Lady Ashford did not answer immediately. Her silence stretched too long, too heavy. Poirot spoke gently, filling the void she could not. "Something worth killing for." The words settled into the stone walls, absorbed by the cold air. Diana wept quietly behind them, her tears falling freely now, no longer restrained by dignity or strength. Mrs. Crane stood very still, her eyes fixed not on the safe, but on Lady Ashford, observing, measuring, waiting. Poirot saw it all, every glance, every breath, every silence. Lady Ashford finally spoke, her voice barely more than air. "Documents, letters." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Letters that revealed truth." She closed her eyes. "Yes." Captain Vale's voice grew harder. "What truth about what?" Poirot answered before she could. "About the past, about debts, about betrayal." Sir Reginald groaned weakly behind them, his body trembling with effort. Poirot turned and knelt beside him once more. "You knew," Poirot said softly. Sir Reginald's eyes flickered open. Pain filled them, but so did something else, regret. His lips moved slowly. "Too late," he whispered. Poirot leaned closer. "Not yet." Sir Reginald's gaze drifted weakly toward Lady Ashford. His voice cracked with effort. "She never forgave." The words dissolved into breath. Lady Ashford's face tightened, her control slipping for the first time. Poirot noticed, because weakness revealed truth more clearly than strength ever could. Captain Vale spoke sharply. "Who took them?" Poirot stood slowly, turning his gaze toward the others. "Someone who knew they existed, someone who knew where to find them, someone who knew their value." Silence answered him, because each of them understood the implication. The killer had not acted blindly. The killer had acted with knowledge, with purpose, with precision. Diana spoke through her tears, her voice trembling. "They're still here." Poirot met her gaze gently. "Yes." The word offered no comfort, only certainty. Above them, the manor remained silent, too silent, as if holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Poirot turned toward the cellar stairs, his mind already assembling the truth, piece by piece. The poison, the vault, the theft, the fear. They were not separate acts, they were one act, one plan, one intention moving steadily toward its conclusion. Poirot understood now. The killer had not wanted Sir Reginald dead immediately. They had wanted him afraid. They had wanted him conscious. They had wanted him to see, to know, to understand. Because death was not the true weapon, truth was. And now the truth was gone, stolen, hidden, controlled. Poirot spoke quietly, his voice steady and final. "They will try again." No one asked who, because they all knew. The answer lived among them, breathing, watching, waiting for darkness. Sir Reginald's breathing had grown worse. Each breath came with visible effort, his chest rising unevenly, his strength slipping further away with every passing second. The poison had not finished him, but it had weakened him enough to make him vulnerable. Vulnerable enough to be moved, vulnerable enough to be silenced. Poirot stood beside him, his calm presence the only still point in the collapsing order of the moment. He could feel it now with certainty. The killer was no longer hiding. The killer was acting, choosing moments, testing reactions, measuring fear. Lady Ashford remained near the empty safe, her face pale, her mind trapped somewhere between memory and consequence. Her hand still trembled, though she no longer noticed it. Mrs. Crane watched her closely, her sharp eyes absorbing every detail. Captain Vale stood rigid, his jaw clenched, his thoughts clearly racing toward conclusions he dared not speak aloud. Diana knelt beside Sir Reginald, her tears falling freely now, her fear no longer restrained by pride. She reached toward his hand hesitantly, unsure whether she sought comfort or offered it. Sir Reginald's fingers twitched weakly beneath hers. His eyes opened slightly. He saw her. Something passed between them, something unfinished, something human. His lips parted. He whispered. The word died before it could become meaning. Poirot leaned closer. "You are safe," he said softly, though he knew safety had never truly existed here. Sir Reginald's eyes shifted slowly. They searched the faces around him, one by one. Captain Vale, Mrs. Crane, Lady Ashford, then Diana again. His expression changed. Fear returned. Not fear of death. fear of someone present, someone watching him now. Poirot followed his gaze carefully. He understood. The killer was not absent. The killer was among them. The realization settled heavily in the air, thick and suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke, because each of them knew that suspicion had already begun its quiet work. Poirot stood slowly, his mind clear now. The pattern had revealed itself. The poison had weakened Sir Reginald. The vault had been opened. The proof had been stolen. The attempt had failed once. It would not fail again. He turned toward the cellar entrance, his voice calm and precise. "We leave this place." Captain Vale frowned. "And abandon the vault?" Poirot shook his head gently. "The vault has already been emptied." The truth was undeniable. Whatever had been taken could not be recovered here. The killer had what they needed. Now they needed only silence. Permanent silence. Lady Ashford spoke weakly. "They will kill him." Poirot met her gaze. "Yes." The word struck her harder than denial ever could. Diana wept quietly beside Sir Reginald, her hands trembling as she held his. She understood now that this was not merely fear. This was ending. Poirot turned, his voice firm but controlled. "He does not remain alone." Captain Vale stepped forward immediately. "I will stay." Mrs. Crane hesitated, then nodded slowly. "So will I." Lady Ashford did not speak, but she did not leave, because she could not leave, because whatever had been stolen from the safe had taken more than paper. It had taken control. Poirot understood the final truth now. The killer had not acted from impulse. The killer had acted from history, from memory, from something that had waited patiently for years, and now that patience was ending. Poirot looked toward the dark cellar entrance one final time. The manor remained silent, but its silence was no longer empty. It was listening, preparing, and somewhere within its ancient walls, the killer was preparing too.
They did not return to sleep. No one suggested it. No one could have endured it. Elmwood Manor had shed the last illusion of safety, and what remained was something raw and exposed. Fear moved freely now, no longer hidden behind politeness or denial. Sir Reginald had been carried carefully from the cellar and returned to the library, placed upon the long leather sofa near the fire. His breathing remained fragile, but he lived. That fact alone frustrated someone. Poirot understood that with absolute certainty. He stood near the window, his hands folded behind his back, his reflection faint in the glass. Outside, the darkness stretched endlessly across the grounds. The trees stood motionless, their branches thin and skeletal beneath the pale moonlight. Somewhere beyond them, the world continued. But here, time had narrowed, focused, tightened around its purpose. Behind him, Lady Ashford sat in silence, her posture upright, her eyes fixed on nothing. Mrs. Crane stood near the fireplace, watching the flames as if they held answers. Captain Vale remained near the door, alert, restless, unwilling to relax even for a moment. Diana sat beside Sir Reginald, her face pale with exhaustion, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Poirot listened to their breathing. Each breath carried truth. Each silence carried meaning. He spoke quietly. The poison was never intended to be the end. Captain Vale looked at him sharply. Then what was its purpose? Poirot answered calmly. To weaken. Mrs. Crane frowned. To weaken him for what? Poirot turned from the window slowly. For removal. The word settled heavily. Lady Ashford closed her eyes briefly. She understood now. She had always understood.
Diana spoke weakly. They wanted the vault. Poirot inclined his head. Yes. Captain Vale's jaw tightened. Then why not kill him immediately? Poirot met his gaze. Because death ends knowledge. He paused. Fear preserves it. Sir Reginald groaned weakly behind them. His consciousness flickered like a failing flame. His lips moved, though no sound came. Poirot approached him calmly. "You remember," Poirot said softly. Sir Reginald's eyes opened slightly. Pain filled them, but so did something else. Terror. He tried to speak. His voice broke apart. Poirot leaned closer. "You saw them." Sir Reginald's fingers twitched weakly. His breathing grew uneven. His lips formed a single word. "Close." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Very close." Captain Vale stepped forward. "Who?" Sir Reginald tried again, but his strength failed him. His eyes closed once more. The moment passed, but Poirot had heard enough. Close. The killer had not been distant. The killer had not been hidden in shadows. The killer had been beside them, watching, waiting, acting when trust allowed it. Poirot returned to the window, his reflection faint and steady. The manor remained silent, but its silence had changed. It was no longer waiting, it was preparing. The fire burned lower as the night deepened, its glow reduced to red embers that pulsed faintly like the last beats of a weakening heart. No one had moved for several minutes. They existed together in a fragile stillness, united not by trust, but by shared uncertainty. Hercule Poirot remained near the window, his eyes calm, his mind alive. He could feel it clearly now. The pattern had narrowed. The truth had taken shape. It no longer hid completely. It revealed itself in fragments, in hesitation, in silence, in fear. Behind him, Sir Reginald shifted weakly. The sound was small, but it carried enormous meaning. He lived, and because he lived, he remained dangerous. Dangerous not through strength, but through memory. Captain Vale stepped closer to him, his voice low. "He is trying to wake." Diana leaned forward instantly, hope and terror battling within her fragile expression. "Sir Reginald," she whispered. His eyelids fluttered slowly. His breathing grew uneven again. His lips parted. Poirot turned, approaching with quiet precision. He knelt beside him once more, his voice calm and steady. "You are safe." Sir Reginald's eyes opened slightly. He saw Poirot. Recognition flickered weakly. Then fear followed. His gaze moved past Poirot, slowly, carefully, searching. He was looking for someone. Poirot noticed immediately. He followed the direction of Sir Reginald's eyes. Lady Ashford stood motionless near the fire. Mrs. Crane remained still beside her. Captain Vale stood near the door. Diana knelt beside the sofa. Sir Reginald's eyes trembled as they passed across each of them. Then they stopped. Just briefly. Just long enough. Poirot saw it. The moment of recognition. The moment of truth. Sir Reginald tried to speak. His lips trembled violently. His voice came as a broken whisper. "He." The word dissolved. Poirot leaned closer. "Yes." Sir Reginald's fingers twitched weakly against the leather. His breathing grew erratic. Panic entered his expression, real panic. His eyes widened suddenly. He had remembered something, something terrible, something final. His lips moved again. "Not finished." The words escaped in fragments. Then his strength failed. His eyes closed once more. Diana began to cry quietly, her tears falling freely now. Lady Ashford turned away, her composure finally cracking beneath the weight of inevitability. Mrs. Crane spoke softly, though her voice carried tension. "He knows who it is." Poirot stood slowly. "Yes." Captain Vale's voice hardened. "Then why not say it?" Poirot met his gaze calmly. "Because fear remained stronger than death." The truth settled heavily. The killer had not merely attempted murder. The killer had ensured silence, ensured hesitation, ensured control. Sir Reginald lived, but his voice had been taken long before poison ever touched his glass. Poirot returned to the window, his reflection steady and precise. Outside, the moon had shifted higher, its pale light stretching across the darkened grounds. Somewhere beyond those trees existed freedom, but inside Elmwood Manor, truth remained trapped, waiting, watching, choosing its moment. Poirot spoke quietly, his voice carrying certainty. "The next act approaches." No one asked what he meant, because they already understood. The killer would not stop, not until the truth belonged only to them.
The clock on the far wall struck 3. The sound carried through the library with cold precision, each chime marking not just the passing of time, but the tightening of inevitability. No one spoke, no one moved. Even breathing seemed intrusive against the silence that had claimed Elmwood Manor. Hercule Poirot stood motionless by the window, his posture unchanged, his thoughts sharp and clear. He had reached the final stage. The truth no longer hid behind complexity. It hid behind courage, the courage to act, the courage to reveal itself. Sir Reginald stirred again, his weakened body resisting the pull of unconsciousness, his fingers twitching faintly against the leather beneath him. Diana leaned forward instantly, her voice trembling. "He's waking." Poirot approached slowly. He watched Sir Reginald's face carefully. Pain was there, fear was there, but something else had returned, resolve. Sir Reginald's eyes opened slightly, his vision unfocused at first, then slowly finding clarity. His gaze found Poirot. He tried to speak. Poirot leaned closer. "You remember," Poirot said softly. Sir Reginald's lips trembled. He nodded weakly. The movement cost him greatly. His breath shook. His eyes moved again, searching, watching, measuring the room. Poirot understood. The fear had not faded, it had deepened. Sir Reginald was not afraid of death. He was afraid of presence. He was afraid of someone still standing among them. Sir Reginald's hand lifted weakly. His fingers trembled in the air. He tried to point. His strength failed him. His arm fell. His breathing grew rapid. Panic returned to his face. Poirot spoke calmly. "You are not alone." Sir Reginald's lips moved. His voice emerged in fragments. Wait." Poirot's eyes sharpened slightly. "Where?" Sir Reginald's breath broke. His eyes filled with terror. "Close." The word barely existed, but it was enough. Close. The killer had never left them. The killer had never hidden. The killer had remained visible, trusted, patient. Poirot stood slowly. He turned his gaze across the room once more. Lady Ashford stood near the fire, her face pale and drawn. Mrs. Crane remained beside her, her calmness fragile now. Captain Vale stood near the door, his expression controlled but tense. Diana remained beside Sir Reginald, her tears silent. Poirot saw them clearly now, not as victims, not as witnesses, but as truth. One of them carried death. One of them carried motive strong enough to wait years, strong enough to poison, strong enough to steal, strong enough to finish what had begun.
Poirot returned to the center of the room. His voice remained calm, but it carried finality. "It ends soon." Lady Ashford whispered weakly, "How can you know?" Poirot met her gaze gently, "Because the killer has already chosen." Silence answered him. Outside, the first faint traces of dawn began to touch the horizon. Night was ending, but inside Elmwood Manor, darkness still held its ground. Because truth does not belong to light, truth belongs to revelation, and revelation had arrived. Dawn came slowly, reluctantly, as if even the sun hesitated to touch Elmwood Manor. Pale gray light crept through the tall windows, revealing the exhaustion that had claimed every face in the room. No one had slept. No one had escaped the quiet terror that had grown steadily stronger with every passing hour. Hercule Poirot remained standing, his posture unchanged, his mind clear. He had reached the final threshold. He understood now not only what had happened, but why. And why, he knew, mattered more than anything else. Sir Reginald lay motionless upon the leather sofa, his breathing shallow but steady. He had survived the poison, but survival had come at a cost. Fear had hollowed him. Diana sat beside him, her eyes swollen from weeping, her hands clasped tightly together as though holding herself intact. Lady Ashford remained near the cold fireplace, her strength diminished but not broken. Mrs. Crane stood near the far wall, silent and watchful. Captain Vale had not moved from his place near the door. He stood like a guard, though it was no longer clear whom he protected. Poirot stepped forward at last. The moment had arrived. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, gentle, and absolute. "We have reached the end." No one questioned him, because they knew, they felt it. Lady Ashford spoke weakly. "You know who did it?" Poirot inclined his head. "Yes." The word fell with quiet certainty. Diana's breath caught sharply. Mrs. Crane's fingers tightened at her side. Captain Vale did not move, but something in his expression hardened. Poirot continued, his tone steady. "The poison was not chosen for speed. It was chosen for effect." He walked slowly toward the center of the room. "It weakened without ending. It frightened without finishing." His eyes moved across each of them. "Because death was never the first objective." Silence deepened. Poirot stopped. "Fear was." Captain Vale spoke sharply. "Why?" Poirot met his gaze calmly. "Because fear forces revelation." He paused. "It forces memory." Lady Ashford closed her eyes briefly. She understood now. Mrs. Crane whispered, "They wanted him to remember." Poirot nodded once. "Yes." Diana's voice trembled. "Remember what?" Poirot answered gently, "Truth." Sir Reginald stirred weakly behind them, as though even unconscious he could hear the word. Truth. The thing he had feared most, the thing someone else had demanded. Poirot continued, "The vault was not opened for wealth." He paused. "It was opened for proof." Captain Vale's jaw tightened. "Proof of what?" Poirot answered without hesitation, "Of guilt." The word struck harder than any accusation. Diana wept quietly again. Lady Ashford turned away, unable to endure the weight of what had returned. Poirot spoke softly now. "The killer did not act from impulse." His voice lowered further. "The killer acted from memory." He allowed the truth to settle, because truth required space, required silence, required courage. Poirot looked at each of them one final time. The killer had waited many years. Dawn grew brighter behind him, but inside Elmwood Manor, darkness still listened. No one spoke for several seconds after Poirot's words faded. The silence became unbearable, stretching across the room like a living thing. Diana's quiet sobs filled the void, fragile and broken, while Sir Reginald's uneven breathing reminded them all that death had come close enough to touch him and had chosen for now to wait. Lady Ashford remained turned away, her shoulders rigid, her composure barely holding together. Mrs. Crane's sharp eyes never left Poirot, watching him with the intensity of someone who understood that this moment would change everything. Captain Vale stood still near the door, his face pale but controlled, his mind clearly racing ahead of what Poirot had yet to say. Poirot allowed the silence to exist, because silence forced truth forward, because silence stripped away defense. He stepped forward again, his shoes making the faintest sound against the polished floor. "The killer," he said quietly, "did not act to escape justice." He paused, his eyes steady. "The killer acted to create it." Mrs. Crane exhaled slowly, her voice trembling despite her effort to remain calm. "Justice?" Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Yes." Diana lifted her tear-filled eyes. "But why now?" Poirot answered gently. "Because time had finally run out." Captain Vale frowned. "Time for what?" Poirot met his gaze. "For silence." The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Lady Ashford spoke weakly without turning. "Some things are buried for a reason." Poirot's voice remained calm. "Yes," he paused, "but burial does not erase existence." Sir Reginald stirred again, his lips moving faintly. Diana leaned closer instantly. "He's trying to speak." Poirot approached slowly. He watched Sir Reginald carefully, studying every movement, every tremor. Sir Reginald's eyes opened weakly. His gaze struggled to focus. His lips trembled. "No," he whispered. Poirot leaned closer. "Yes." Sir Reginald's breathing grew faster, panic rising once more. His eyes darted across the room, searching, avoiding, remembering. Poirot spoke softly. "You know why this has happened." Sir Reginald's lips trembled violently. His voice broke apart. "They blame." The word dissolved into breath. Diana began to cry harder. Mrs. Crane turned away briefly, her strength faltering. Captain Vale's hands tightened at his sides. Lady Ashford did not move at all. Poirot straightened slowly. He understood now the final truth. This had never been merely about murder. It had been about reckoning, about forcing a man to confront the consequences he had escaped for years. Poirot spoke quietly, his voice filled not with accusation, but with certainty. "The killer did not act to destroy him." He paused. "The killer acted to make him remember." Sir Reginald closed his eyes tightly, as though trying to escape the past itself. But memory does not release those who deserve it. Memory waits. Memory returns. Memory finishes what time begins. Poirot turned away from him, his eyes steady. Dawn light filled the room now, pale but unstoppable, and with it came truth. The dawn light spread slowly across the library floor, reaching toward each of them without mercy. It revealed everything. The exhaustion in Diana's tear-streaked face, the quiet tension in Captain Vale's rigid stance, the trembling restraint in Lady Ashford's pale hands, the cold calculation behind Mrs. Crane's watchful eyes, and the broken, helpless fragility of Sir Reginald Blackwell. Truth did not arrive loudly. It arrived like this, quiet, relentless, impossible to stop. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of it all, his small frame steady, his mind clear, his purpose complete. He had seen this moment before, not in this house, not with these people, but always the same ending, always the same reckoning. He spoke gently, but his words carried final weight. The poison was only the beginning. Diana looked at him through her tears. Beginning of what? Poirot met her gaze kindly. Of truth. Her shoulders trembled as she wept openly now, no longer trying to be strong, because strength had abandoned them all. Mrs. Crane exhaled slowly, her voice barely steady. Then say it. Poirot did not hesitate. Sir Reginald was not meant to die immediately. Captain Vale's jaw tightened. He was meant to suffer. Poirot inclined his head slightly. Yes. Sir Reginald's breathing grew erratic, his fear returning, as if he could hear every word, even through weakness. His fingers twitched faintly against the leather beneath him. Lady Ashford finally turned, her face pale beyond dignity. Her voice cracked as she spoke. You cannot undo the past. Poirot answered softly. No. He paused. But the past does not forget. Silence followed. The truth no longer hid itself. It existed fully now, alive and undeniable. Poirot continued. Someone here carried memory stronger than fear. He looked slowly across each of them, stronger than time. Captain Vale shifted slightly, his composure thinning. Mrs. Crane's breathing deepened. Lady Ashford's hands trembled openly now. Diana wept without restraint. Sir Reginald's eyes opened suddenly, wide with terror. He knew, he remembered, and remembering had broken him more completely than poison ever could. His lips trembled as he forced out a single word. Forgive. The word collapsed into nothing, because forgiveness does not belong to those who ask too late. Poirot stepped closer, his voice calm and final. It is finished. No one argued, because they understood. The truth had already claimed them. Outside, the sun rose fully, its light touching Elmwood Manor at last. But inside, nothing could erase what had been revealed. Nothing could undo what had been remembered. Nothing could return them to who they had been before fear entered their lives. Poirot stood quietly, his work complete. Justice had not arrived with violence. It had arrived with truth, and truth, once revealed, never leaves.
Morning fully claimed Elmwood Manor, yet no one felt relief. The sunlight that entered through the tall windows did not bring warmth, it brought exposure. It illuminated faces that had changed forever during the long night. Fear had aged them, truth had hollowed them. Hercule Poirot stood quietly near the center of the room, his calm presence the only constant in a world that had shifted irreversibly. He observed them all without judgment, without haste, because understanding mattered more than reaction. Sir Reginald lay still upon the leather sofa, his breathing shallow, his strength diminished. He no longer struggled, he no longer resisted. He existed now only as a man stripped of illusion. Diana sat beside him, her tears exhausted, her silence deeper than grief. She did not look at him, she did not look at anyone. Her world had broken, and she did not yet know how to rebuild it. Lady Ashford remained standing near the window, her posture rigid, her face pale beneath the unforgiving light.
She had spent her life controlling every detail, shaping every outcome, preserving every appearance, but now control had abandoned her. Mrs. Crane leaned lightly against the wall, her sharp confidence softened by something unfamiliar, something closer to uncertainty. Captain Vale stood motionless near the door, his duty unclear, his certainty shaken. Poirot finally spoke, his voice gentle but absolute. "The truth has revealed itself." No one answered, because truth did not require agreement. Truth existed regardless. Diana's voice emerged weakly. "Why?" The question carried everything: pain, loss, confusion. Poirot turned toward her, his expression kind. "Because truth always seeks its moment." She shook her head slightly, her voice trembling. "But why hurt him?" Poirot answered carefully. "Because memory can wound more deeply than death." Sir Reginald stirred faintly, his eyes opening just enough to reveal awareness. He heard them, he understood them, and understanding had destroyed him more completely than poison ever could. His lips moved weakly, no sound emerged. Lady Ashford turned toward him slowly, her composure fractured. For a moment, something human returned to her expression, something fragile, something filled with regret. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "It should have stayed buried." Poirot answered without accusation, "But burial is not justice." Mrs. Crane spoke quietly. "Then what is?" Poirot met her gaze. "Truth." The words settled over them like final judgment. Captain Vale shifted slightly. "And now?" Poirot turned toward the window, his reflection faint in the glass. "Now comes consequence." No one asked him to explain, because consequence did not need explanation. It arrived naturally, inevitably. Sir Reginald closed his eyes again, his strength failing once more. Diana remained beside him, silent and unmoving. Lady Ashford stood frozen between past and present. Mrs. Crane watched everything carefully. Captain Vale waited, and Poirot understood that the case itself had ended, but its impact had only begun. Elmwood Manor would never return to what it had been, because truth does not leave quietly. Truth remains.
The hours that passed slowly, each minute heavy with consequence. No one left the library, no one dared separate from the fragile safety of shared presence. Outside, life continued. Birds called across the distant trees, wind moved gently through the branches, sunlight strengthened. But inside Elmwood Manor, time had narrowed, focused, trapped between what had been and what could never be undone. Hercule Poirot remained still, his mind no longer searching, no longer assembling pieces. The truth was complete. What remained now was acceptance. Diana sat motionless beside Sir Reginald, her hands folded tightly together. She did not cry any more. Tears belonged to uncertainty, and uncertainty had ended. Only truth remained now. She spoke without looking up. "He knew," Poirot answered gently. "Yes." Her voice trembled faintly. "He remembered everything." Poirot inclined his head. "Memory can be a prison." Sir Reginald stirred weakly, his breathing uneven once more. His lips parted. Diana leaned closer despite herself. He whispered something.
so faint, so fragile. She froze, her eyes widened. He said, "Sorry." The word hung in the air, fragile and useless, because apology cannot repair destruction. Diana closed her eyes, her face collapsing beneath emotion she could no longer contain. Her shoulders trembled as quiet weeping returned, not loud, not dramatic, just broken. Lady Ashford turned away sharply, unable to endure the sound. Her own control trembled beneath the weight of memory. Mrs. Crane spoke quietly, her voice softer than it had ever been. "Regret arrives late," Poirot answered calmly, "but it always arrives." Captain Vale stepped forward slightly. "What happens now?" Poirot turned toward him. "The truth will not remain hidden." Vale's jaw tightened. "You will tell them?" Poirot did not hesitate. "Yes." Lady Ashford closed her eyes briefly. She understood. The illusion was over. The protection she had built for years had fallen in a single night. There was no rebuilding it. Diana wiped her tears slowly, her hands trembling. "Everything changes now." Poirot answered gently, "Yes," but his voice carried something more. Not cruelty, not satisfaction, only certainty. Because truth does not negotiate. Truth does not soften itself for comfort. Truth exists, and existence alone is enough to change everything. Sir Reginald's breathing weakened again. His strength continued to fade. He had lived long enough to face what he had done, long enough to understand what had returned to claim him. Poirot watched him quietly. Justice had not arrived in violence. It had arrived in awareness, and awareness had broken him completely. Outside, the sunlight continued to grow stronger, but inside Elmwood Manor, nothing would ever feel bright again.
By midday, exhaustion had replaced fear. Not because the danger had passed, but because the truth had settled too deeply to be ignored any longer. The house itself seemed different now, smaller, quieter, stripped of its authority. Elmwood Manor had once stood as a monument to permanence, to wealth, to legacy. Now it stood as something else, a witness, a keeper of consequence. Hercule Poirot stood near the mantel, his eyes resting briefly on the dying fire. The flames had nearly vanished, leaving only faint embers beneath grey ash. It reminded him of what remained of Sir Reginald Blackwell. Once powerful, once untouchable, now fragile, mortal, real. Diana remained beside him, her posture calmer now, though her eyes carried something older than grief, something closer to awakening. She spoke quietly. "He was afraid." Poirot answered gently, "Yes." She hesitated. "Not of dying?" Poirot inclined his head. "No." Diana's voice trembled faintly. "He was afraid of remembering." Poirot did not speak, because she had already reached the truth herself. Memory had stripped Sir Reginald of protection. Memory had forced him to confront what he had buried beneath years of control. Lady Ashford remained near the window, her silence absolute. She had not spoken for some time, not because she had nothing to say, but because she finally understood that words could no longer protect her. Mrs. Crane moved slowly across the room, her confidence quieter now, replaced by something closer to reflection. Captain Vale remained near the door, his posture less rigid, though no less alert.
He understood now that protection no longer meant defense, it meant acceptance. Sir Reginald's breathing grew weaker. Each breath came slower than the last. Diana noticed immediately. She leaned closer. Sir Reginald. His eyes opened slightly. He looked at her, not with fear, not with power, but with something else, something fragile, something human. Regret. His lips trembled. No words came. He did not need them. Diana's tears returned quietly, falling without resistance. She did not speak. She did not accuse. She only remained, because sometimes presence is the only mercy left. Poirot watched carefully. Justice had already arrived. There would be no dramatic confession, no final declaration, only consequence. And consequence had already taken everything from him. Sir Reginald's breathing slowed further, then stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Diana froze. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached toward him. He did not move. He would never move again. Lady Ashford closed her eyes. Mrs. Crane lowered her head. Captain Vale stood still, his respect quiet but real. Poirot bowed his head slightly, not in grief, but in acknowledgement. The past had claimed its due. Elmwood Manor remained silent, but its silence had changed, because truth had finally finished what memory began.
Death did not arrive loudly. It arrived in silence. Sir Reginald Blackwell lay motionless upon the leather sofa, his face pale and emptied of fear at last. The tension that had lived within him for years had vanished in a single quiet moment. What remained was stillness. Diana did not move. Her hand remained resting gently on his arm, as if she could still feel life beneath her fingers if she only waited long enough. But waiting would not change anything. Waiting had never changed anything. Lady Ashford stood frozen near the window, her face turned away from the scene she had spent her life trying to control. Mrs. Crane lowered her eyes, her sharp confidence softened by the undeniable presence of finality. Captain Vale removed his hat slowly, holding it against his chest in silent acknowledgement. Hercule Poirot remained where he stood, his posture calm, his expression neither cold nor warm, only understanding. Because death, he knew, was not the true ending here. Truth had already ended everything long before Sir Reginald's heart had stopped. Diana's voice emerged weakly, fragile as glass. "He's gone." No one contradicted her, because denial belonged to hope, and hope had no place left inside Elmwood Manor. Poirot stepped forward quietly. He did not touch the body. He did not need to. He had seen death many times before. He spoke gently. "Yes." Diana's shoulders trembled. Tears fell silently, no longer violent, no longer desperate, only inevitable. Lady Ashford spoke at last, her voice hollow. "It is finished." Poirot turned toward her. "No." She looked at him, confusion breaking through her exhaustion. Poirot continued softly, "It has only revealed itself." She closed her eyes briefly, because she understood. Death had not erased truth. Death had confirmed it. Mrs. Crane spoke quietly. "What happens now?" Poirot answered calmly, "Now comes consequence." Captain Vale looked toward him. "You will tell them." Poirot met his gaze. "Yes." There would be no concealment, no preservation of illusion. Truth belonged to the living now. Diana wiped her tears slowly, her face pale but steady.
Everything is different. Poirot inclined his head gently. Yes, but he saw something else in her eyes now. Not only grief, not only loss, something stronger, something forming beneath the destruction. Freedom. Because truth, while painful, releases those who accept it. Outside, the wind moved through the trees once more. Elmwood Manor stood unchanged in stone, but everything within it had shifted forever. The man who ruled through fear lay powerless. The secrets he had buried had risen. The lives shaped by his silence would now move forward without it. Poirot looked at each of them quietly. His work was complete, not because death had arrived, but because truth had survived.
No one moved to cover the body. No one rushed to escape the room. They remained where they were, held in place not by obligation, but by understanding. Death had not shocked them. It had completed something that had begun long ago. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of realization. Diana slowly withdrew her hand from Sir Reginald's arm. Her fingers trembled faintly, as though releasing not just his body, but the weight of everything he had carried into her life. She stood carefully, her legs unsteady, but her posture stronger than before. She did not look back at him again, because she understood that the man who had shaped her existence no longer held power over her future. Lady Ashford remained near the window, her face pale beneath the daylight. She spoke without turning. He took it with him. Poirot answered calmly, "No." She looked at him then, confusion and fear mixing together. Poirot's voice remained gentle. "Truth does not die." Mrs. Crane exhaled quietly, her voice softer than ever before. "Then it belongs to us now." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes." Captain Vale stepped forward slightly. "And what will you do with it?" Poirot met his gaze directly. "I will ensure it is known." Lady Ashford's composure faltered. "You will destroy everything." Poirot shook his head gently. "No." He paused. "Truth does not destroy. Truth reveals what was already broken." The word settled heavily upon her, because she understood that destruction had begun long before Poirot had ever arrived at Elmwood Manor. Diana spoke quietly, her voice steadier now. "It's over." Poirot looked at her carefully. "Yes." But he saw something more in her expression now. Not only grief, not only pain, but release. Because truth, once accepted, frees those who no longer carry its burden alone. Mrs. Crane moved slowly toward the door. "This house will never feel the same." Poirot answered gently, "No." Captain Vale opened the door quietly, allowing fresh air to enter the room. The breeze moved softly across the floor, touching each of them equally. It carried no judgment, only change. Diana turned toward Poirot. "What happens to me now?" Poirot smiled faintly, kindly. "Now, mademoiselle, you live." She did not fully understand yet, but she would. Because truth, while painful, creates space for new beginnings. Lady Ashford lowered her head, her strength finally surrendering to consequence. Mrs. Crane stepped into the hallway, her confidence quieted but not erased. Captain Vale remained still, his duty fulfilled. Poirot remained calm, because he knew that justice had not arrived through punishment. Justice had arrived through revelation, and revelation had changed everything.
They left him there for a time, not out of neglect, but out of respect for the finality that had claimed him. Sir Reginald Blackwell
once a man of immense power, now lay silent and beyond consequence. Death had taken his voice, but it had not taken the truth he had carried. That truth remained alive in every person standing within Elmwood Manor. Diana moved first, slowly, carefully, as though every step forward required courage she had only just discovered. She stopped beside the window, looking out across the vast grounds that had once defined her world. The trees stood unchanged, the sky wide and endless, the morning light clear and unforgiving. Everything outside remained the same, everything inside had changed forever. Her voice came quietly. "I don't know who I am now." Poirot stepped beside her, his presence calm and steady. "You are yourself." She shook her head faintly, tears forming again, but no longer falling. "Everything I believed," her voice faltered. Poirot answered gently, "Belief is not identity." She looked at him, searching for certainty. "Then what is?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Choice." The word settled into her, fragile but powerful, because choice had never belonged to her before. It did now. Lady Ashford stood motionless behind them, her face drawn and pale. She had lost everything she had spent her life protecting: control, reputation, illusion. Mrs. Crane returned briefly, her voice quieter than usual. "They've sent for the doctor." Poirot inclined his head. "It is no longer urgent." Captain Vale stood near the doorway, watching silently, his thoughts private. He had witnessed truth strip away power. He had seen justice arrive without violence. He understood now that duty did not end with protection. Duty ended with acceptance. Diana turned from the window slowly. She looked once more at Sir Reginald's still form. There was no hatred in her expression, no forgiveness either, only understanding, and understanding was enough. She spoke softly. "He was afraid." Poirot answered gently, "Yes." She paused. "Not of dying." Poirot inclined his head. "No." Her voice trembled faintly. "He was afraid of the truth." Poirot did not speak, because she had reached the final understanding herself. Lady Ashford lowered her head slowly, her voice breaking at last. "We all were." Silence followed, honest, unavoidable. Poirot looked at each of them quietly. His work here was complete, not because he had ended something, but because he had revealed it. Outside, the wind moved through the trees once more. Elmwood Manor stood unchanged in stone, but emptied of illusion, and in that emptiness, something new had begun. Stood inside truth. Hercule Poirot approached quietly, his footsteps soft, respectful. He did not interrupt her thoughts. He waited, because healing does not accept command, it accepts presence. She spoke first, her voice calm but fragile. "It feels different." Poirot nodded gently. "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "Empty." Poirot answered, "Empty is not absence." She looked at him uncertain. He continued softly, "Empty is space." She understood slowly, because space allows rebuilding. Lady Ashford remained confined to her room, not by force, but by consequence. Mrs. Crane had already begun making arrangements to leave, her confidence quieter but intact. Captain Vale stood outside with quiet patience, ensuring order without imposing control. The manor itself had fallen silent. No more secrets moved within its walls. No more fear controlled its shadows. Only memory remained. Diana's voice trembled faintly. "Will it follow me?" Poirot answered gently. "Memory always follows." She closed her eyes briefly. "Then I will carry it." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, because carrying truth is the only way to live beyond it." She looked toward the open sky beyond the gates. For the first time, her expression held something new. Not peace, not yet, but possibility. Poirot watched her quietly.
Evening approached quietly, without ceremony, without urgency. The long shadows stretched across the floors of Elmwood Manor, touching walls that had witnessed too much and spoken too little. The house felt older now, not in stone, but in truth. Diana walked slowly through the corridor, her footsteps soft, her presence lighter than it had been in years. She paused near the doorway of the library, the room where everything had ended, the room where everything had begun again. She stood there for several seconds, breathing slowly, allowing herself to feel without fear. The leather sofa remained in its place, now empty. No trace of Sir Reginald remained except memory, and memory no longer controlled her. Hercule Poirot stood nearby, preparing quietly for his departure. His coat rested neatly over his arm, his hat held carefully in his hand. His work here was complete, but he did not rush. He never rushed the final moment. Diana spoke softly. "You knew?" Poirot looked at her gently. "Yes." She hesitated. "Not at first." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "Truth reveals itself when it is ready." She looked at him, her eyes clearer now than they had been since he arrived. "Were you afraid?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No." She frowned slightly, surprised. "Not even once?" Poirot answered calmly. "Fear does not help truth." She let out a quiet breath that almost became laughter. Not joy, but release, because fear had controlled her for so long, and now fear no longer had a place to live. Outside, Captain Vale waited beside the motor car, his posture calm, his duty complete. Mrs. Crane had already left hours before, her departure quiet, her future uncertain. Lady Ashford remained inside, alone with the consequences she had spent a lifetime avoiding. Diana spoke again, her voice steady. "What happens to her?" Poirot answered gently. "She will face truth." Diana nodded slowly. She understood now that consequence was not cruelty. Consequence was balance. She walked toward the window one last time, watching the fading light settle across the grounds. "This place," she whispered. Poirot stepped beside her. "It will remain." She nodded. "But it will never be the same." Poirot answered softly. "No, because truth changes everything it touches." She turned toward him. "Thank you." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "You are welcome." But gratitude was not what he had come for. He had come for truth, and truth had been found. Diana watched him walk toward the door. She did not stop him, because she understood that his presence belonged to moments like these, moments where illusion ends and life begins again. He paused briefly at the doorway, looking back once more, not at the house, not at its walls, but at her, because she was no longer part of its past. She was part of its future. He left without another word, and Elmwood Manor released its final secret into silence. Night returned to Elmwood Manor with a gentleness it had not known for many years.
The darkness no longer pressed against the windows like an intruder. It settled naturally, peacefully, as night was meant to do. The long corridors rested. The silent rooms breathed again. For the first time in decades, the house held no secrets waiting to surface. Diana remained standing near the great entrance, listening to the fading sound of the motor car as it disappeared down the long gravel drive. Poirot was gone, his work finished, his presence no longer needed. She did not feel abandoned, she felt released. The air inside the manor felt different now, lighter, honest. She stepped forward slowly, her fingers trailing gently along the polished wood of the staircase railing. Every object she passed carried memory, but memory no longer controlled her. Memory had become something else, something she owned rather than something that owned her. She paused at the tall front doors and opened them. Cool night air greeted her face. The sky stretched wide above her, endless and indifferent. The stars shone with quiet certainty, untouched by human truth or human lies. She stepped outside onto the stone steps, breathing deeply. Her chest rose and fell slowly, steadily. She was still here. She had survived the truth. Behind her, Elmwood Manor stood silent. It did not call to her. It did not demand her return. It simply existed, a place, no longer a prison, no longer a keeper of fear, only a place. Captain Vale approached quietly from the shadows, his voice respectful. "Miss Ashford." She turned toward him. She noticed the difference in how he spoke now, not with obligation, with recognition. She answered softly, "Yes." He hesitated briefly. "Will you remain here?" She looked back at the house. For a long moment she did not answer, because the question was larger than place, larger than inheritance, larger than past. Finally she shook her head gently. "No." The word surprised even her, but it felt right. Captain Vale nodded once. He understood. She looked toward the open drive, toward the world beyond the gates. Her voice trembled faintly, but it carried strength. "I will leave tomorrow." Vale inclined his head. "If you require anything." She smiled faintly. "I do not." Because what she required could not be given. It could only be lived. He stepped back, allowing her space, respecting her choice. Diana remained there alone beneath the open sky. She did not weep, she did not fear. She simply existed, free from illusion, free from silence, free from the weight of secrets that had never belonged to her. Inside the manor, the clocks continued their quiet ticking. Time had not stopped. Time had never stopped, but something else had ended. The past had released her. Far away, Hercule Poirot sat quietly in the moving motor car, his eyes closed, his mind at peace. He did not need to see the house again. He knew its story had finished. Justice had not come in anger. It had come in truth. And truth, once spoken, needs nothing more. Elmwood Manor stood beneath the silent stars, no longer a place of fear, but a place where truth had lived, had been revealed, and had finally, mercifully, been set free.